Somewhere in the archives of a Russian diving forum, there is a video that almost nobody outside a small circle of cave and lake divers has ever seen. It is 11 seconds long. It is grainy, lit by a single handheld torch, and it shows a wall of black rock falling away into nothing. And then, for just a moment, something crosses in front of a lens that the divers who filmed it still refuse to explain. This is the story of that footage, the lake it came from, and the question that has followed it ever since. What exactly did they find down there? And why has no one been able to go back and check? To understand why this clip matters, you have to understand the place it came from. Lake Baikal sits in a long crescent-shaped scar across southern Siberia, carved by a rift in the Earth's crust that has been slowly pulling apart for roughly 25 million years. It is the oldest lake on the planet, and by a wide margin, the deepest, plunging more than a mile below the surface at its lowest point. It holds more fresh water than all of North America's Great Lakes combined, and that water is famous for being almost unnaturally clear, so transparent in places that divers have described it as diving through glass. That clarity is part of why this footage, brief as it is, spread the way it did. In water that clean, people assumed there was nowhere for anything to hide. The clip itself reportedly comes from a small technical diving team conducting cold water training somewhere along Baikal's eastern shore, in a stretch of coastline known for sheer underwater cliffs that drop almost immediately into deep water. According to the diver's own account, posted afterward on a closed forum for extreme cold water diving, they were filming a routine equipment check around 90 meters down when their lights swept across an irregularity in the rock face. What followed, they say, was not a creature bearing teeth or lunging at the camera. It was something stranger and, in its own way, more unsettling, a shape that did not match anything in the rock, holding still just long enough to be filmed, before sliding sideways into a crevice and disappearing. Now, before going any further, it's worth being honest about what we actually know and what we don't. The footage has never been independently verified. The original poster's account has since been deleted. No research institution has confirmed receiving the file, and no scientific body has examined the original recording. What exists publicly is a low-resolution copy, several times re-uploaded, recompressed, and reshared, the kind of digital game of telephone that strips detail away every time it changes hands. So nothing here should be taken as proven. What we can talk about, honestly, is why a clip like this would even seem plausible to people who know the lake well, and why Baikal in particular keeps generating stories like this one decade after decade. Start with the basic fact that Baikal is nowhere near fully explored. It sounds strange to say about a lake that has been studied by scientists for over a century, but the numbers back it up. The lake's deepest basins, the truly dark water more than a kilometer down, have only been visited by a handful of manned and unmanned submersibles in all of recorded history. Entire features of the lake floor, including hydrothermal vent systems that support unique chemical ecosystems, were not even discovered until the 1990s. That means for most of the 20th century, scientists studying one of the most famous lakes on Earth had no idea those vents, or the strange organisms clustered around them, existed at all. If something that significant could stay hidden for that long in plain sight, it raises an obvious question. What else might still be down there that nobody has stumbled onto yet? The biology of the lake makes that question even harder to dismiss outright. Because Baikal has been geographically isolated for so long, evolution inside it has run its own separate experiment, cut off from the rest of the world's freshwater systems. More than 2,000 species have been cataloged in the lake, and over half of them exist nowhere else on the planet. There is a freshwater seal found almost nowhere else in the world, stranded hundreds of miles from any ocean. There is a fish so saturated with oil that its body is nearly transparent, and which, when exposed to warmth, doesn't decay in any conventional sense. It essentially melts. These aren't legends. They are documented, studied, photographed animals that happen to sound like something out of a horror story, simply because Baikal's isolation has produced biology that looks unfamiliar to everyone else. New species are still being identified there on a regular basis. Each expedition tends to bring back something nobody had named before. In other words, the lake has a track record of producing real surprises, which is exactly the kind of environment where an unverified clip like this one gains traction. It isn't that people believe in monsters. It's that they've learned again and again that Baikal genuinely holds things we haven't cataloged yet. Then there's the human history layered on top of the biology. The indigenous Buryat people, who have lived along Baikal's shores for generations, have oral traditions that treat the lake with a seriousness closer to respect for a force of nature than fear of a fictional beast. Central to many of those traditions is a figure often translated as the Lord or Master of the Water, a massive, serpent-like presence said to rule the depths and tolerate fishing only when it was done with the proper respect. Skeptics are right to point out that nearly every deep, cold, mysterious lake on Earth eventually accumulates a story like this. Loch Ness has one. Lake Champlain has one. It seems to be something close to a universal human response to staring into water you cannot see the bottom of. So a lake legend on its own proves nothing about what is or isn't actually in the water. What makes Baikal's case a little different is that the reports didn't stay confined to old stories told to children. Modern fishing crews working the lake with engines and synthetic nets have, for decades, reported nets torn open in ways that don't match the kind of damage caused by the fish species known to live there. Boats have reportedly been rocked on flat, windless days by something moving beneath the hull, with no clear explanation from weather or current. None of this constitutes proof. Torn nets can be explained by old gear, snag rocks, or fish species behaving in ways researchers haven't fully documented yet. But the pattern has been persistent enough and reported by enough working fishermen with no folklore to sell that local researchers have never been able to fully close the file on it either. This is the backdrop the new footage dropped into, and it's worth walking through carefully what the divers who filmed it actually claimed, separating their description from the speculation that grew up around it afterward. According to their account, the dive was meant to be unremarkable, a depth and cold tolerance exercise along a known wall formation, the kind of dive experienced cold water divers do routinely to maintain certification and comfort at depth. They were not searching for anything unusual. The lead diver's light was simply sweeping the rock face when, for a few frames, something in the footage breaks the pattern of the stone. It isn't fast. It isn't aggressive. By the diver's own description, it almost looked like it was holding still, as though waiting to see if it had been noticed, before withdrawing into a fissure in the rock and vanishing from the beam of light entirely. What happened in the minutes after, according to the same account, is in some ways more interesting than the footage itself. The divers say they did not panic. They completed a normal controlled descent, followed their planned safety stops, and surfaced without incident. There was no equivalent here to the kind of decompression emergency that haunts older Cold War-era stories about Baikal. No chaotic rush to the surface, no injuries. If their account is accurate, what they brought back was simply 11 seconds of ambiguous footage and a story that none of them, by their own admission, expected anyone to take seriously. So why did it spread? Partly because the clip itself is genuinely difficult to interpret. Slowed down and examined frame by amateur analysts online, the shape in question doesn't cleanly resolve into a known fish, a seal, a diver's own equipment, or a trick of refracted light, at least not to everyone's satisfaction. Partly because it landed in a community of people who already understood, from direct experience, that Baikal habitually reveals things nobody expected. And partly, frankly, because uncertainty is irresistible. A blurry shape that might be nothing, captured by people with real diving credentials, in a lake famous for hiding 25 million years of secrets, is the kind of story that survives precisely because it can't be definitively closed. It is important to say clearly that this could very plausibly be nothing extraordinary at all. A known species behaving unusually, a play of light against rock, a diver's own shadow distorted by the angle of a torch, a piece of old fishing gear or debris drifting along the cliff face. Every one of those explanations is mundane. All of them are consistent with what little evidence exists, and any honest treatment of this story has to put them on the table right alongside the more dramatic possibilities. The footage has not been authenticated. The original source account is no longer available to question, and no scientific team has been able to revisit the exact site to look for whatever the divers say they saw. But here is the part that keeps people circling back to it. Baikal has spent 25 million years building a floor that almost nobody has actually seen with their own eyes. Sonar can map the shape of the lakebed. Satellites can chart its surface. But the deep basins themselves, the kind of terrain where this clip was supposedly filmed, remain visited only rarely by only a handful of people, with only a handful of cameras. A lake that hid an entire hydrothermal ecosystem until the 1990s, and that continues to produce undocumented species on nearly every serious expedition, is not a body of water where it makes sense to say, with total confidence, that nothing strange remains to be found. That doesn't mean the footage shows something unknown to science. It might well be a known animal doing something unfamiliar, viewed for a few disorienting seconds in poor light at depth. But it does mean that dismissing the question outright, simply because it sounds far-fetched, isn't really supported by what we actually know about how much of this lake remains unexplored. So where does that leave us? With a short, unverified piece of footage, a group of divers who, by their own account, didn't go looking for anything unusual and didn't expect their dive log to become an online mystery, and a lake with a well-documented habit of holding back its secrets for far longer than anyone expects. Maybe what crossed that camera was something perfectly explainable, lost to a bad angle and colder judgment than the moment allowed. Or maybe it's simply one more entry in a long list of things Baikal has shown people over the decades that science hasn't gotten around to cataloging yet. What do you think actually crossed that camera? A known animal behaving strangely in low light, a trick of refraction against 25 million years of rock, or something the lake still hasn't let anyone get close enough to properly identify? Tell me which explanation you find most convincing, and which detail of this account you think doesn't quite add up. And if you want to keep exploring the parts of this planet that are still genuinely unmapped, stay around. Because Baikal is far from the only place on Earth holding onto secrets this stubbornly.